Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. Today is the third and final part of a long conversation I had with Truman from Return to Reason. We continue our conversation on the shifting hierarchy at large in America, and therefore around the world today. Because this conversation was so long, almost 3 hours to be exact, we decided to split it up into 3 different podcasts. This will be the Engineering Politics Podcast number 17, 18, and 19. But if you want a good foundation for this discussion, since this is a topic we've expanded on in several podcasts already, listen to the Engineering Politics Podcast number 16 to get caught up. And because it's a long podcast, there will be no bonus content at the end. But I would still appreciate you joining and subscribing to the Engineering Politics Locals community. You can go to engineeringpolitics.locals.com and become a member for free, or get a subscriber pass for as little as $2 per month. And you can use promo code EPFREE for a 3-month free trial of the subscription pass. That's spelled EPFREE. I'll go over more of where you can find me and support this content after the show. And also make sure to show some support for Truman of Return to Reason. You can find Truman and join his locals community at returntoreason.locals.com. If you like the Engineering Politics Locals community, you'll love the Return to Reason Locals community too, so go check them out. Alright, let's get this started. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast.
So let's bring it home a little bit here and use this next little bit as a springboard into the next portion of the conversation, which obviously we'll have at a later point in time. So I'd like to give kind of the conclusion to Duhigg's chapter on corrupt institutions and what happened after Rhode Island State Hospital. Their hierarchy became at least less corrupted or less noticeably corrupted. He gives a story that contrasts with the one that you read at the beginning. And then I'd like to use that as a segue into another part of that Duhigg talks about, where if you look at my section on crises in the notes there, as a way to kind of segue into the next part of, again, why this is worrying. But so if we've been trying to establish some examples of, again, the way that we know that our hierarchies become corrupted is whenever it doesn't allow feedback, or when it is very antagonistic against feedback. It's another way of articulating that. And it starts to serve the purposes of those at the top and not the original purpose of the hierarchy generally. Those are some ways that we know that it becomes corrupted. So what happened with Rhode Island Hospital that Duhigg writes about is that they had enough instances of surgeries going way wrong, leaving, drill bits inside of patients and people dying, and surgeries, just really avoidable errors, that they were running the risk of losing their status as a hospital. They were fined. At one point, they were fined $50,000, and then later they were fined $400,000, I believe, for all the different errors. It might have been $450,000. And they were at running the risk of losing their accreditation as a hospital from the state. And there was a woman who was in charge of one department there and realized how she could use that opportunity to kind of remake the culture. And they shut down all elective surgeries for a day, and they had this whole thing about teamwork. Teamwork became the emphasis. And it made a lot of sense with Rhode Island Hospital, right? Because there wasn't a teamwork. It was us versus them. It was the surgeons are trying to maintain their status, and the nurses are just trying not to get firing at their head bit off for saying, hey, maybe we should double check the chart, So it was very corrupt, and the nurses didn't have the latitude to speak into the hierarchy with the surgeons. So Duhigg closes his chapter with an anecdote of how after it became reformed, and he gets into the processes of how that happened, which I think is a good place for us to close out. But here's the anecdote. He says there was this, he paints the picture of they're about to do the surgery on someone's abdomen, and there was a nurse who, she was like 27. She was young. She was the youngest nurse at the hospital at the time. and they're about to do the surgery, and they did their check-in or their timeout or whatever, and the doctor picks up the scalpel and he says, "Is there any other comments or concerns before we start?" And the nurse, and so then this is where Duhigg picks up, quote, "Doctor," a new young nurse responded, "I want to remind everyone that we have to pause between the first and second procedures. You didn't mention that, and I just want to make sure we remember." So here we have this young nurse. It's kind of similar to the situation that Kevin read at the beginning with, trying to call, "Hey, we need to have this timeout. Doctor, are you going to do this?" And the doctor says, "If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. If you have a problem with that, get the hell out of my OR." So here we have another situation a few years afterwards where this young nurse is like, "Hey, just wanted to make sure we remember to do this." And here's what the doctor says, okay? He is at the top of the hierarchy. He's just been given feedback from the bottom or kind of outside a little bit of the hierarchy to where he's at. Here's a non-corrupt hierarchy. Here's what his response. Doctor says, "Thanks for adding that," the surgeon said. "I'll remember to mention it next time." Okay, let's start. And Duhigg ends the chapter with this quote from the nurse who says, "I've heard about all these challenges they had in the past, but right now, I feel like I can say anything. It's a really great place to work." And the point that she makes and that Duhigg's trying to underscore is that what makes it a great place to work, what makes it a functioning hierarchy, is that feedback is okay, it's welcome, it's that she's free to provide that feedback into the system, even though there is a surgeon who's been doing these things forever. He's got, hundreds of successful surgeries under his belt, a wall full of all these different diplomas, and she's just some 27-year-old young nurse, that she can still say, "Hey, here's my thoughts." Again, provide feedback into the hierarchy, and she's okay to do so. And he, as a person at the top of the hierarchy, welcomes that feedback. So that's a really good contrast of a corrupt hierarchy where the doctor is very antagonistic and gives a lot of pushback and takes a lot of issue with feedback, with a non-corrupt hierarchy where the doctor is like, "Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you telling me that. Let's continue." And how they got there provides a little bit of a segue to where I think is a good place to close. But Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of how we could extrapolate that principle out from what we see now?
I think it's very clear as to how it did it. And there's a word you hit on when giving your explanation how they changed it. It's reform. It is reform, and we don't use that word now, or we kind of pretend to use it. The word we use in place of reform is dismantle. There's a huge difference between the two, and the main difference that we see today is reform is always normally a good idea, right? Because we like to look at these hierarchies and say, what is your stated goal? What is your main objective, right? Hierarchy of police is to protect people, right? So let's reform the police. No, we're not going to reform the police. We are going to defund the police. We're going to dismantle the police.
Abolish.
How can we make that more attractive to the everyday person who would not give in to that BS? You define the objective as racist. You define protection of people as racist because it has disproportionate outcomes sometimes. We don't worry about the variables and the preconditions that lead to the disproportionate outcomes. But we define the stated goal. That's how you completely dismantle a hierarchy, because no one wants to dismantle a hierarchy. That stated goal is still valid. You invalidate the stated goal, you rebuild the hierarchy in whatever image you feel fit. So that's the difference between dismantle and reform, and what you just described.
Using your own redefined terms, like you said, you
Right.
dismantle it and whatever you see fit. You redefine everything about it.
Yeah, and you can redefine terms to say at the end use of this new dismantle police forces to protect, but you change the definition of protect into proportionately protect or proportional results. You have now changed the stated goal. So here, if we're going to woke reform this hospital, you dismantle it. And an idea of dismantling, probably because doctors tend to make more money than nurses, right, would be to change the pay structure. That would probably end up with less talented doctors, maybe more talented nurses, but then you need to take on normally extra elective surgeries, which make the most money to compensate for the extra payment on the nurse. Like there's so many of these things that take you away from the stated goal of protecting or serving people in the hospital to serving, the people you want to bring in to change the objective of the hierarchy. So I think the most important lesson here, and something that I think we can take right into the closing topic, is reform as opposed to dismantle in most cases is what we want to look at.
No, that's exactly right. So to kind of bring it home, and of course, Kevin, here after I say this last part, I want your feedback, your thoughts. So I feel like we've done a decent job here of kind of at the beginning articulating why this matters. Why does this matter to Kevin? Why does this matter to Truman? Why is this important to us? And then given some examples. We spent quite a while last time. Again, I think it's great. Recommend people watch it. Talking about hierarchies, just kind of what you would, maybe like a telescopic view, from afar, a distance view of understanding them and how they function. And then, at the beginning, we tried to bring it to, okay, also this is really, really important for your life, for my life, for anyone who is willing to listen to this for their life. And here's why. And then we give some examples of what happens when a hierarchy becomes corrupt. It starts to serve the goals and the ends of those at the top, and it insulates itself from feedback. And we gave some examples, whether it's the Rhode Island State Hospital, where the nurses couldn't provide feedback with the surgeons and people were dying. People had surgery operated on them in the wrong parts because the nurses couldn't provide any feedback. Again, I'd highly recommend The Power of Habit by, I believe it's Charles Duhigg. It's a great book generally. And then we also talked about Jim Crow, which is the one that everyone resonates, at least in terms of they understand that this was a corrupt thing, this was a bad thing. And one of the things that made it bad, one of the things that defined it, that we don't learn enough about. And I absolutely agree, at least with the idea that we need to learn more about it. I'm not on the same page as people like in Illinois where they're like, we need to remove all history books. That to me is super dangerous. But to say we need to learn more about it, hey, yeah, where do I sign? Yeah, we need to learn more about it. I agree. Is that there were people in the South that were afraid of Black people succeeding and realizing they were human beings that they had wronged. And again, this is just my personal take on it. I think that they knew what they deserved as a result of supporting the system of slavery. And they were afraid of Black people getting power because they knew that if Black people acted malevolently with that power, then those who supported that system would get some kind of justice. I think they were afraid of justice. But either way, they used the system. Again, we have a hierarchy, that's government, that's a legal system, the court, so on and so forth, to pass laws and create officially codified policies that, again, like with Rhode Island State Hospital, which is unofficial, but this is where they make official policies that insulate the top of the hierarchy from feedback. So they make it to where in North Carolina, by the turn of the century, 0% of Blacks that are eligible to vote are registered to vote. That's a problem. That's a problem. 0.5% of Blacks that are eligible to vote are registered to vote at the turn of the century in Louisiana. That's a problem. So they were a vote, again, like you said earlier, it's feedback. Voting is feedback into the system. So they just removed their feedback into the system. And so the point we're trying to get at, we're not saying we're in the middle of some Jim Crow for whites or something like that, or that, this is surgeons or anything like that. The point we're trying to illustrate is that the way hierarchies operate when they become corrupt, wherever they are, whatever field they're in, is that one of the ways we know is they insulate themselves from feedback. They're antagonistic to feedback, and they do it on moral grounds, or they use intimidation. So the doctor is intimidated. They say, I know more than you. I'm better than you. If you have a problem, go somewhere else. And in the Jim Crow South, they used really perverse moral and religious arguments to justify the ways that they shut blacks out of the political system. And so whatever the system, whenever you are not allowing feedback into the hierarchy, it's becoming corrupt. And so that's one of the things that we're talking about kind of now, that we're identifying as a problem. And so one of the things I want to read here, that I just kind of want to read a few quotes from that same chapter that has Rhode Island State Hospital and the London Underground about crisis, and how that kind of is a springboard in the next part. I want to read some of these quotes and this excerpt from Duhaig's book, and you can give your thoughts on that, and we can kind of end there. But the reason this matters is that, hierarchies don't just come into power by accident. There's ways that they can come in, just, by happenstance. But crisis and turmoil is one way that they do that. And we're seeing that people seizing on that opportunity now. And so here's one thing that Duhaig, this is kind of a collection from maybe about 5-6 minutes at the end. So I have this book on Audible at the end of this chapter, The Power of Crisis, that I transcribed here for you guys. But I'll kind of elaborate on this, and then, Kevin will give his thoughts and we can end it. So he says, during turmoil, organizational habits become malleable enough to assign responsibilities and create a more equitable balance of power. Crises are so valuable, in fact, that sometimes it's worth stirring up a sense of looming catastrophe rather than let it die down. Reform is only possible when a sense of crisis takes hold, and good leaders seize on crises to remake organizational habits. Crises are such valuable opportunities. A wise leader often prolongs the sense of emergency on purpose. A company with dysfunctional habits can't turn around simply because a leader orders it. Rather, wise executives seek out moments of crisis or create the perception of crisis and cultivate the sense that something must change until everyone is finally ready to overhaul the patterns they live with each day. You never want a serious crisis to go to waste, Rahm Emanuel told a conference of chief executives in the wake of the 2008 global financial meltdown. Rahm Emanuel was a former mayor, I believe, of Chicago, and he went on and he was part of Obama's chief of staff. Emanuel continues, this crisis provides the opportunity for us to do things that you could not do before. So right after the 2008 financial crisis, we get, pardon me, again, I'm allergic to bullcrap. Soon afterwards, you get Obamacare, you get this huge stimulus package, you get certain ridiculous policies in the Consumer Protection, Financial Protection Agency, so on and so forth. And one thing that Duhaig says is he says it was one of the biggest policy overhauls since the Great Society and the New Deal. And it happened because in the aftermath of a financial catastrophe, lawmakers saw opportunity. So all of this idea about how what's it look like when a hierarchy becomes corrupt, and what are the telltale signs, part of that is relevant here is because we're seeing that. And if you were to say how is this happening? Kevin, how's this happening? Truman, how's this happening? Well, part of that is because we have this perception of crisis, whether it's economic crisis or climate crisis with the Green New Deal, or racial crisis. Things are worse now than they've ever been, including when Ida B. Wells was being harassed by people on conductors on a train car just for being black in her train car. Things are worse now than what Ida B. Wells ever experienced. What an absolutely disgusting joke. But the point is that there are people who have successfully, we're not saying will or could or potentially, but are and have successfully used crisis, used this perception of crisis, whether it's with climate or race or whatever. And again, we're not saying there aren't racial issues. We're not saying there aren't climate-based issues. Of course, sir, I don't think either Kevin or I would ever deny that. But the point is there are people who are opportunistic and are using those things as a way of seizing the fact that things are very malleable when there's a sense of crisis. And as a result, and one thing that I was telling Kevin before we started this, that Duhaig doesn't talk about is Duhaig only talks about crisis can be really useful in changing bad practices of organizations. Well, he never addresses what happens whenever someone malevolent or someone with bad motives or bad goals or destructive goals seizes on that opportunity. He never addresses that. And I think that's one thing that's important to recognize and to contemplate. and to see as a part of what we're experiencing now that there are people who are acting on that thing that Rahm Emanuel talked about, which you never let a good crisis go to waste. And there are people with malevolent goals and with authoritarian and destructive goals that want to use the perception of crisis or actual crisis. George Floyd, for example, Ahmaud Arbery, those protests and so on, as a means of shaping policy in their direction, and they want to change things like Duhigg identifies here is possible, but not necessarily in a way that's a benefit to the overall population. Kevin, I want to get your thoughts on that, and then we can bring it to a close here.
Yeah, I was going to say, a threat of a looming crisis, I've never heard of it. Definitely not used in our politics now.
It's true.
But on a serious point, a perpetual state of crisis has been probably used as long as politics has been around. It ebbs and flows. Obviously, there are real crises that merit this type of reform and change, and policymaking. There are, and what really sucks is I think what you brought up, and what I believe Duhigg kind of maybe doesn't explicitly allude to, but implicitly alludes to, is it really harms us when we're up at 11 all the time, and there's no way to go higher than that when a real crisis happens.
That's right.
And I think maybe this is part of the reason COVID's not taken as seriously. It's like, why? We have climate change. We got all this stuff. I mean, people are kind of seeing behind the curtain. I'm with you. I totally believe climate change exists, although I don't like the power grab that's coming from it. And that's why you get people who are like, we're always in a state of crisis. Why is this COVID thing any different? Why am I going to follow the expert? And why am I going to follow what you recommend? And why are you forcing me to do these things now? Because it seems like when you do this, it never ends well for me. So being in a perpetual state of crisis really damages us when it comes to reacting to a real crisis. And that's really what hurts most. What is newer now, I'm not going to say totally new, is manufactured oppression. I think we've always used it, and I don't want to say Democrats because again, I'm sure both sides have used it. I mean, certainly both sides have used it. I think Republicans have used immigration a bit too much to manufacture oppression and say they're going to take your jobs. That's what I was about to do. But the manufactured oppression to activate the black voting base by the Democrats, certainly has been utilized since the 60s because they saw it was powerful.
Can I just, I think this is important just in case we ever gain any notoriety. Manufactured oppression, you're not saying all oppression is manufactured,
Absolutely
but that there is aspects of quote unquote oppression that are either embellished or manufactured to maintain or continue previous real legitimate oppression.
Absolutely. The one of the biggest problems you see right now from modern day progressive is the oppressor versus oppressed relationship. It's kind of like the racist and anti-racist relationship. You can't apply it to everything. It's not applicable to everything. So it really damages it when you apply that relationship to everything. And that's what's happening. Every single relationship, there's an oppressor and there's an oppressed. And when you do that, you start to lose the meaning behind it. And that's what's been utilized. And I kind of would fit it into this crisis category, right? When you're going to manufacture oppression where there isn't any there, or it's amplified high enough where you're going to say, you must vote for me or it will never change. I mean, two things come from that. One, obviously it hurts us when real oppression happens. You see it and it's like, I don't believe you because you've used that line so many times.
Chicken Little. Yep.
Right. And the other thing is it becomes a staple of your platform, right? You realize, and people use this with drug companies, like drug companies never invent cures. They only invent things that kind of help mitigate the symptoms, because if they invent a cure, well, who are you going to sell it to once everyone's cured from this thing, right? The same thing applies to parties that use oppression or snapshots in time or relationships and snapshots in time and try to expand that to other points in time. You know, when I say oppression or when I use oppression as a platform, once oppression is gone, what happens to that talking point? It's rendered useless. Now these people are able to vote however they want, and we don't really want that. So when you use this manufactured oppression to activate a voting base, you have now lost the incentive as a policy maker to actually help that. And I've said this in the past, the worst possible thing for the Democratic Party would be for Black people as a people to begin to excel. And you don't really see it change much. I think they're much less sinister now than they were back in Jim Crow times, but it's the same strategy. And
wait, who's much less sinister? The Democrats, who are the
I would
ones
say the
implementing Jim
Democrats.
Crow?
Yes. Well,
They're much
yes.
less. Okay, all right, fair enough.
I would say less sinister, and they don't truly believe Black people are subhuman. They don't believe these things, but they see them as a voting base, which is really not seeing them as a person anyways. You're not seeing them as a constituency. You're seeing them as a vote.
Back then, seriously, read that paper from LSU where it talks about the barbecues and they'd make these Democrat leagues. And the whole point was to bring Blacks over to their cause. They spent a couple years doing this. I mean, it's really smart strategically. Obviously, it was immoral and evil. But the point was to make it to, and that's where you get to where I said Republicans didn't even have a primary because they were trying to get the Blacks to come over to their side. And then what happens? They pass literacy laws and make it where they can't even vote. It's very evil and very corrupt. So, Kevin, give your kind of final thoughts on kind of springboarding us into the next part of this in terms of bringing us up to date to where we are now and what we're seeing with the emergence of this new hierarchy shift. In addition to, one of the things we hinted at in the last video, how there was a hierarchy change in the last within the left. So we have a hierarchy within a hierarchy that changes, and then we're kind of in a situation where it's not as simple as we thought it was in terms of where the left and right, whatever those terms mean, which is virtually nothing these days. And I want to get into that next time, but set us up here, and then I'll kind of close this out and bring us home. But if you're going to give a very fine point analysis of that, what do you got? Let's hear it.
So where we're at today, and I kind of agree with you. Right and left has kind of become a useless descriptor, although I believe is a very accurate worldview. When applied correctly, I think it is very concise and useful. It's just we apply it today as anything. Anyone who spouts anything that's racist is considered a right winger, even though the far right and far left believe in the exact same thing.
Yep.
But what we're seeing today is we're seeing this emergence of a new hierarchy that is trying to solidify, right? There's a bunch of volatilities went through in the last podcast, and this is just because the ideology keeps moving. And when you have a moving ideology, you can't just sit in one spot and expect to be a part of this new movement. You must keep moving in a specific direction in order to keep moving. And I think part of that comes from the veil they're trying to cast that makes them seem like they are not on top of the hierarchy, although they are, right? You have people who are out there preaching, saying, I am on the bottom of the ladder and I'm just trying to get myself up and I'm trying to get all these other people up. And they're not saying like, oh no, we are the people setting the tone right now. You disagree with us, it's going to be a problem for you. If we disagree with what we claim as the white oppressors, the people at the top of the hierarchy, guess what? Nothing will happen to us because we maintain the power right now. And so I think that's a little bit of why you're getting the volatility, is they must keep masking themselves as the oppressed in order to keep generating popularity and keep the momentum from this movement going. I think that's an important part of what they're trying to accomplish. But it all starts with the changeover in the hierarchy within the left itself, right? You have what we consider traditional Democrats, you could call them liberals, right? There's not much in terms of especially policies and beliefs and worldview that are very liberal about the current day Democratic Party. Those people who you see be at the top of the hierarchy and be kind of the thought leaders of it are getting shut down and pushed to the bottom, and now that feedback has been cut off. The feedback is now racist, right? Kind of the fascistic feedback where it's like you can consider yourself someone on the left, but if you give the wrong feedback, understand the trade-off you're agreeing to. Like we will take you down immediately. We'll call you a racist. You're either an ally or a racist, right?
Mirror
So
our rhetoric, or else you're going down
right.
too. Yep.
And that is really harmful because there's a competing hierarchy that we call, what we call the right wing, right? And especially when these hierarchies are tied together, there has to be a healthy hierarchy opposing it in order for the other one to maintain, I would say, to stay on task with their objectives. Let's put it that way. And when the other one just completely breaks down and flips upside down, I mean, the right wing one, they're absorbing people by the thousands every day, right? I consider, if you're a liberal now, guess what? You're conservative, because conservatives inherently conserve things. And the ideology of liberalism, which is the central principle of maintaining individual liberty, is now completely abandoned by the progressives who are driving the left-wing bus right now. Yep. So conservatives 100%. Are now conserving the ideology just to maintain that point of reference, which is really important. And how we begun this conversation was my connection with something that Jordan Peterson said when he was talking about the left, right, and how they act in the American context compared to the European context. Where the Europeans, traditionally, it was the right wing conserving the hierarchies, and the left wing, I use tearing it down. I think it's a bit too harsh. What I would say is reforming. I think reforming is a more responsible answer to that one, to not paint them as just evil people, right? Because they're good people, and you need reform in order to not become rigid. And what has happened,
and to not become corrupt.
Exactly, yeah. And the American context is based more on policy, where, again, in Europe, the most right-wing guys you have kind of are socialists, basically, because that's just what has taken over in Europe. That's just kind of the economic model. But we must understand now, America is the number one influencer. The number one export in America is culture. And as you see with the George Floyd protests, I mean, you have protests in like Germany and the UK about something that happened in Minnesota, right? So if you don't think
Australia,
we're mass exporting,
New Zealand,
right? I mean, there's insane movements happening because of this one thing. And so what we're seeing now is crises like that, right? That one I don't even use. It's sort of manufactured oppression just because it's not very clear that the officer in that case was doing it out of racist intentions. But more so, he's either an a-hole or he's actually like knew the guy ahead of time and was just malicious toward the individual. But even if it was taken in a racist way, it doesn't mean that all police are racist, and that connection's not valid. But opportunities like this and past opportunities that may have started or certainly propelled it with Mike Brown in Ferguson in 2014, that has really shot off the trajectory. And that's not when BLM was created, but that is when they started. And they're one of the forefronts of this movement, that they were able to flip the hierarchy. And this hierarchy I would define basically as a cultural hierarchy. What are our beliefs? How do we interact with people? What do we believe in as a society, right? We used to believe in individual liberty, individual rights. You're allowed to do what you want. We kind of had this liberal idea, allowed to do what you want as long as you're not hurting me, that's fine. This has now been completely flipped around, where if you say something bad about me, not only is that not acceptable, that's violence now, right?
100%.
So you have this flip, which happened relatively fast. I think this has been over probably like a decade or so this has slowly been happening. Yep.
Pause.
Yes.
You're getting into what we're gonna talk about later about the hierarchy flip.
Nice.
So
okay.
So well, it's good. It's good. So we can tease people with, there is a thing that is shifted here, and people don't realize it. We kind of teased a little bit, and we've given some red flags about it, right? Of how we could know maybe happened right now. But I don't want to get too much into the way that's happened.
I got too excited. I apologize.
No. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. No, that's good, dude. I've had that 8 seconds has got about 8 drops left in it. So let's call it here, and let's say that next time we're going to get into, which I think this is a great conversations, by the way. Let's get it next time. We'll get into exactly what the hell we're talking about with this stuff today, right now. So we introduced the idea of how hierarchies function, how they come about, and what roles they serve. And then this time, and actually that last conversation was all over the place, but had some really interesting stuff in it. Like seriously, it was great. And then this time we talked about kind of why does this matter to us? Why does this matter to Kevin? Why does it matter to Truman? And then what are some examples? So if someone's like, well, what are you talking about? We can say, well, no, here's what it looks like when a hierarchy becomes corrupted. Here's what it means. All right. Here's some concrete examples that anyone can identify with. An 86-year-old man getting the wrong side of his skull removed, because the hierarchy is so corrupt, there's no feedback. People resonate with that and they go, oh my gosh, that's horrible. Ida B. Wells saying, I don't have any faith in the legal system anymore because the hierarchies become so corrupted. Holy crap, you'd have to be a heartless monster to not identify with that. So we've given some indicators of what does it mean when a hierarchy becomes corrupted. It's not allowing feedback from the outside or from the bottom to tell it like, hey, you're not serving the purpose that you say you're supposed to serve, that it was created for. And so the next time, which is what you're starting to get into, next time we can get into what are the contemporary right now examples we can look at it of that, and why does it matter, and how do we fight some of that stuff? Does that sound good as a segue into the next one? I'm sorry to kind of
No,
I guess
good.
cut you off a little bit, but I don't want to get it too much into the stuff for next time. Is that fair enough?
No, you got to end on a cliffhanger. It's like the
right.
new season of Stranger Things.
Fair enough. Yeah, man. I am actually the one show Netflix does right. I haven't watched Umbrella Academy season 2, but if it's anything like season 1, which was totally predictable, I'm sure it won't be that awesome. But I'll still watch it. Okay, so that was about 2.5 hours, man. That was a lot. So we should probably stop it there. Kevin, this was a great conversation. Kevin does engineering politics. He has a page on, he has his own website, engineeringpolitics.com, right?
Yep.
And then he has engineeringpolitics.locals.com. He's on Twitter, ENG_politics, not English politics, engineering politics. He's on ThinkSpot. He's on what's the other one that the
Parler.
Parler, that's the one. I almost said right-wing Twitter, but I don't.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Parler, he's on
still
YouTube.
Getting used to it.
Yeah, engineering politics. Kevin gives fantastic insights, like you said earlier, and this is not even it's not even a knock, it's not pejorative. He listens to people that are brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and he tries to think of ways to distill their insights and filter it through our current context, which is a very invaluable service and an invaluable type of content that you could interact with. So I'd highly recommend anyone check that out. We're going to continue this conversation, him and I always love talking to Kevin. This is great. Even whenever we're out of it, like we said at the beginning, hey, you're tired, I'm tired, you're exhausted, I'm exhausted. It could be for different reasons, but we both think this is worthy stuff because we care about this country, we care about the values, we care about the place that our children are going to be raised in, and this isn't about race, this isn't about gender, anything. It's about principles and about values. So I'd highly recommend checking out Kevin's stuff. Kevin, did I miss anything in terms of plugging your content that you would that you could correct me on?
No, man. I just also, for the people listening on Engineering Politics, make sure to go to the Return to Reason Locals community. So returntoreason.locals.com. Also, check them out on Twitter at My Mundane Mind. And then you're also on ThinkSpot at Return to Reason, and also at My Little Pony on Facebook.
That's true. It's My Little Pony #1 fan, and use the hashtag for the number. It's not the word number. Me and the guy with the word number, we have our own differences about the role that Rainbow Bright plays in My Little Pony lore. Right, that's as far as I'm going to go on that particular stupid joke, but I do appreciate that plug. So check me out on my locals and on Twitter. I also I drank some honey whiskey and started a petition for Facebook to change their name officially to a metric ton of bullshit. Mostly because, wait, did I say Facebook? CNN. For CNN to change their name to a metric ton of bullshit. You can find that on change.org. put a link there because CNN is frustrating for a whole myriad of reasons we're not even going to get into. But one of those is that they advocate for and promulgate the ideas that Kevin and I are explicitly speaking against right now, the ideas that are trying to rip our country apart. So you can check that out. That's not something I ever anticipated plugging, but you know what? We're at about 2,500 signatures in about 3 days, which is pretty good. Never would have thought that would have happened. But anyway, that's it. I don't have anything else. Kevin, are we good? I can stop this, and we're going to do another conversation hopefully soon. Joe Biden's going to have his VP nominee by the end of next week. So we could wrap this up and get into some politics potentially next time or the time after. Do you have any other thoughts before we close it out?
No, man. There's one quick connection that I made that maybe might help, I guess, someone else who's listening or watching this, and I'll try to make it very quick because I know we've gone long enough.
Sure.
I don't know if you watched the show Dark on Netflix.
Haven't.
It's an amazing show. It's the best show on Netflix, like I think by far. It's a German show, but it's dubbed over. So as long as you can get with the voices being off from the characters' movements and stuff like that, you'll be fine. But it's well worth it. Normally that would be something that bothers me. But just to get into a specific part, there's a new inspector that came in to help the chief of police to find these missing children. And he's trying to tell her to revisit these documents from 33 years ago. And she's like, why are you re-questioning these people? We've already questioned it. And he said, he had this story saying, if you have 9 people staring at an elephant from 9 different positions, you're going to get 9 different perspectives. You're going to get 9 different weights, heights, color, everything like that. And he says, what I want to do, what's better than that is having one person sit at 9 different spots so he can build a full picture and a full perspective. That's what I would consider when you read someone else and read people who don't believe in what you believe, and then take that information and rewrite it in your own words. That is the best way to get those 9 different viewpoints and build your own picture of what the situation is or what you're trying to learn. So that's good. I think one reason why you should read different people. There's brilliant people out there. Read people you don't like, listen to people you don't like, and build your own picture of what's happening. I think that's one of the most important things. And that's what I would have said at the beginning of the podcast if you'd have re-asked me why I do what I do.
No, you're fine. That's good. All right, guys. Appreciate you watching. Thanks again. Check both of us out on all of our content creation sources, particularly Locals and on Twitter. Appreciate it. And we'll check you next time. Kevin, I'm going to stop recording. All right.
Sweet.
Peace.
Bye. All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Make sure to join the Return to Reason Locals community and show Truman some support. You can go to returntoreason.locals.com to support his Locals community, and you can also find him on ThinkSpot and YouTube by searching Return to Reason. And you can also find him on Twitter at MyMundaneMind. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I want to take a quick moment to share different ways you can help support this content. There are a few easy ways to do this. You can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics. You can give me a follow on Parler at Engineering Politics. You can join the Facebook group named Engineering Politics, where I share and discuss content with the Facebook community. You can also subscribe to my video channel on YouTube under the channel name Engineering Politics, where you can find the video version of each podcast. I'm also active on ThinkSpot, which is a discourse-generating application that promotes intelligent and honest conversations while discouraging the trolling and nonsense found on most social media platforms. You can find all of my podcasts and videos on there as well. But the best way to interact with me, get the newest content, and support this podcast is the Engineering Politics Locals community. This is an amazing community that goes far beyond just a membership platform intermediary for creators. It allows followers of this content to get together and discuss the newest articles, podcasts, and videos all in one place. I strongly urge you to join the Engineering Politics Locals community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You can become a member for free, and now you can get a 3-month free trial when becoming a subscriber if you use promo code EPFREE. That's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I would love to have your support with your subscription so this content can remain independent and keep growing. Monthly subscriptions to the Engineering Politics Locals community start as low as $2 per month. So I hope I can count on your support so I can start making higher quality podcasts and subscriber content like the bonus content at the end of most shows, and the new video series, the EP Zone, available only in the Engineering Politics Locals community with a subscription pass. I appreciate your consideration. Let's build a community together. Thanks for listening. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. None of the persons, podcasts, books, or other references other than engineering politics used in this work directly reflect my ideas and/or personal beliefs, nor should they be held accountable for anything said during this podcast. Thank you for listening.